Welcome to Penn State Dickinson Law's Profiles in Leadership series. My name is Daryl Lim. I serve as the H. Lady Bontam Junior Chair and Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the Law School. This series offers an opportunity to glean insights from top leaders. In each episode, we invite these leaders to reflect on their journeys and share skills, core values, and qualities that make them the leaders they are today. We're very pleased to welcome Dr. Stanley Lai, who is head of Allen and Gledhill's intellectual property practice and co-head of the cybersecurity and data protection practice. He specializes in all forms of IP litigation and arbitration and information technology disputes before the Singapore courts, and is also a commercial litigator and arbitrator. He is a senior counsel, which is part of an elite group of lawyers recognized for their exceptional advocacy skills, deep legal knowledge, and high professional standing, essentially considered the top tier of the legal profession and are granted the right to use the initials SC after their names. The title is awarded by a selection committee led by the Chief Justice. He was conferred the Public Service Star at the Singapore National Day Awards 2024 in recognition by the Ministry of Law of his stellar contributions to Singapore's IP sector as the chairman of the IP Office of Singapore. For his contributions, Stanley also received a Public Service Medal in 2020. He is an author of many published journal articles and was the first Singapore-born lawyer conferred a PhD by the University of Cambridge for his published thesis, The Copyright Protection of Computer Software in the United Kingdom. Welcome, Stanley.
Thank you, Daryl.
So let's start with your upcoming trip to the United States. You'll be leading a delegation. Tell us about what your goals and aspirations for the trip are.
Thank you, Daryl. I think we're coming from we're arriving in the US from the 25th of February onwards until the middle of March. And it starts in New York, and then we're heading to Chicago and also Los Angeles. The plan is to participate in a series of seminars, culminating in California Arbitration Week. And what we're trying to do is to acquaint our stakeholders and known contacts and new contacts with the dispute resolution framework of Singapore, especially arbitration, and how it can be well suited to intellectual property disputes. It's a follow-on, if you like, from the same trip we did last year, where we met you and many others, and we're also privileged to be able to acquaint ourselves with the United States dispute resolution scene for IP. And from there, we've tried to build on that, and we hope to perhaps have more pointed discussions on some of the more salient points of arbitration, and how, I think that there are disputants from the United States that may be quite curious about Singapore's role in providing a center for dispute resolution, especially given this new bifurcation, if you like, between two major countries. And there are disputes that we do see and participate in quite regularly now as a result of that. So I think happy to share experience and also to answer any questions.
Thanks. So this is a podcast that focuses on leadership. So I want to ask you about your personal philosophy on leadership and how that might have evolved over the years.
It's I think evolution is a good way to describe leadership, because I think years ago when you're first assigned your first leadership position, you tend to have very prefix ideas, and because you're anxious to secure outcomes, you tend to be more fastidious about top-down achievement and laying out goals. But as I see, having gone through almost close to 20 years in this kind of role, it's evolved, and I've learned to be adaptable. You also have to adapt to the mindset of those whom you lead. And I think, so there's no fixed leadership philosophy as such, but I think as you go more and more into it, you find that you actually have to be open to learning more and more from those whom you lead, and also changing times, technology, that all fashions the whole leadership ecosystem. So I wouldn't really call it a philosophy as such. I think one has had to adapt, not just to circumstances, but to the evolving workforce. We can talk more about that, but that is definitely a change in the lawyers we see passing through now compared to those in the early years. And that is something we need to embrace to realize outcomes for the future.
So you are a leader in at least 3 different spheres. You are a leader in practice, you are a leader within the public sector on the board of IPOS, but you're also a thought leader in the writings you do, the teaching that you do. Is leadership different in each of those spheres? If so, how are they different for you?
Yes, I mean, there are definitely differences. I mean, I think the leadership role that takes up the most time is the role one discharges in the firm, where you have to think not in terms of practice, your own individual practice, that is paramount. You have to make sure that there's enough business that comes to the door. And then looking at the larger sphere of the firm, you also need to make sure that you think in terms of what is best for the entire firm. So you take on a more holistic approach to leadership and realizing the benefits for the larger community, including our overseas offices. So that's something, you take on a larger stewardship in that role. In terms of thought leadership, thought leadership is more personal because it turns on the quality of your personal study. I've always thought that was an area I've always tried to be active in that area and interested, and the categories are never closed. You never stop learning. Just over Chinese New Year, I mean, it was all, massive read up about DeepSeek and what is it we need to tell our clients going forward. Just as an example, you just have to be constantly evolving. In the public sector, the leadership role comes in a more intertwined context where you have to work with management, because I mean, as the chairman of IPOS, it's a non-executive role. My main role there is governance and stewardship, and managing the board of directors. But I also have to work very closely with the senior management and even middle and other facets of the stat board to achieve certain outcomes. So I would like to think of that as more collaborative. I also need to have a reference point with the ministry overseeing IPOS, the Ministry of Law. I mean, the constant exchanges with the permanent secretary, the deputy secretary, director of IP policy. These are all people who are important to help us deliver our mission, if you like. So it's a very different, they're all very different leadership roles.
Follow-up questions on all 3 of those. So starting from IPOS, you have been there as chair for some time, outlasting at least 2, if not 3, chief executives at this point, with the new chief executive coming in pretty much as we speak. Can you reflect on the continuity and change within the organization as you see it from your vantage point?
I think from my vantage point, I do take some pride in the fact that chief executives have come in and they have left to fulfill a greater national mission, and in some cases an international mission. which means that their time in IPOS was well spent and provided a foundation for them to foster their own networks and at the same time enlarge our footprint in the wider world so that we're positioned to play a role within that larger network. And that I think is a testament to the success and also the fluidity of processes based on merit within IPOS. And it should be very encouraging to younger workers and leaders and what they can aspire to if they apply their minds to it. I think IPOS is a unique step board that gives a very good, sharp focus on national IP infrastructure, national IP policy, but at the same time, you can't do it divorced from the realities of the world and what's going on in all the major countries, the G20, and everybody's got a different IP strategy and also different, all the different IP officers are your competitors, and you just have to make sure that you are up there and command respect as much as the IP officers of larger countries.
What is Singapore's comparative advantage there?
I think we're very quick and nimble, being the size we are. We make quick decisions very, if we need to. If we need to take a decision to add to the resourcing of, say, the patent examiner pool, we can initiate a decision very quickly and make it happen. We also see it through there's an assurance that you're not going to make a decision and then tomorrow there's a hiring freeze. There's no such thing. I mean, there is a congruence, if you like, between all the public agencies, and that's something you can't take for granted because you have Public Service Commission and larger public service overseeing all the public agencies. But at the same time, it has a foundation of consistency and service delivery. So everybody knows that there is a baseline to sign up to, which you can continue to deliver if you're committed. And I think that sets the right tone. So I think that's a big advantage for us. It's also a stable leadership, stable political environment. These are not things to take for granted.
Especially in times like these.
No, especially in times like this. I mean, you read with interesting news from the US and the USPTO. The decision to hire patent examiners is a good example. Hundreds was supposed to be hired, and the minute there's a change of administration, a hiring freeze is put into place, and what happens then? And that has a knock-on effect on pendency. How quick do you process your patent applications? We're always trying to bring it within 12 to 15 months, and even lower if we can manage it. But that's where the race is. It's not really, it's not something you read in the New York Times, but it's always an unspoken sort of active competition that goes on behind the scenes.
So leadership is also forged in the crucible of adversity. And I'd like you to talk about what you regard as some of the most challenging times as the head of department at Allen and Gledhill, but also what are some of the most formative cases that you've worked on as an attorney there?
In terms of crisis, I mean, you do get it. Sometimes you have a crisis of confidence, mass resignations, but you just have to deal with it and keep calm. And what I've learned is that because I think the advantage of Allen and Gledhill, there's very strong leadership at the top and around you. So fellow senior partners are always there to then support. They're also there to provide a sort of ballast so that you can take the decisions that you need, knowing full well that there's not going to be any adverse comment or objection once everybody is agreed on the direction to be taken. So I think that in itself, I've always liked to think of Allen and Gledhill like the microcosm of how Singapore is run. in itself, because I think you do see that consistency and the foundations, they're there, and I think that's certainly very important. In terms of cases that I've managed, there've been many. I mean, I think if you look at the decisions I argued between the years 2010 and then even leading up to 2018, 2019, I think the more interesting decisions would be the ones where on appeal I managed to resurrect the validity of a patent. That was the Mobile decision, which was the first time I think anybody's ever done that. Because I think the strategy in that litigation for patent infringement was interesting. The defendant basically conceded patent infringement and focused the fight on invalidity, which then the plaintiff as the right owner lost. And so the question was then to resurrect the patent that was pronounced invalid by the High Court. So it's quite difficult to do that on appeal, but we managed to. That was notable. A few firsts. I mean, reinstating the importance of human authorship in copyright. I think I did one of the first cases, Asia Pacific Publishing, which I think set the tone for the current discussion now with AI authorship and other things. Even though I think we can talk about that, but that's a different. The conversation is shifting there. And then I think when the International Commercial Court was set up, arguing the B2C2 litigation, which was one of the first involving cryptocurrency platforms, and whether the doctrine of unilateral mistake laced with unconscionability could actually make a point. And it was interesting appearing before a stellar bench comprising local and foreign luminaries. And it's a very different experience, which I think Singapore Council are getting to grips with, some more than others, of course.
Thanks. Now, in terms of your academic journey, it's been quite unusual as well, because as I mentioned in my introduction, you decided to do a PhD, and even today, you don't have that many, if at all, other practitioners with a PhD. What led you to want to do a PhD?
I studied law overseas. In my second year of law school, there was a Fiona Macmillan Petfield who noticed I had an interest in IP. And when I say intellectual property, it was really the subject as we knew it in the early 90s. And I was keen on pursuing it as a postgraduate. So she said, look, if you really want to do this, you should go and learn IP under the professor that taught her. And I said, who was that? And she said, well, W.R. Cornish, Professor Cornish, late Professor Cornish. He died a few years ago. And so I found my way there, did a master's in Cambridge, and he lectured me in IP. At the end of that year, I broached the subject with him. I said, look, is there any way of taking this further, perhaps in a doctoral level? And he said, well, that depends on how it's a very lonely life. I said, well, that pretty much sums up my existence anyway. But would you be prepared to supervise me? And he said, yes. And so, with that, I went through that process and started my PhD in 95, finished it in 98. And it was one of the best years of my life doing that.
Do you think that helped you be a better lawyer?
There are very few lawyers, if you ask them today, whether they're practicing in the area of their chosen field, chosen from university. I have met very few people who haven't been in that fortunate position. So I count myself really blessed, because I was able to practice in the area and subject which I fell in love with when I was in university. So when you speak to me about interest in IP, I sort of sometimes measure that against my own journey, which I think is unfair to interlocutors and people that interact with me, because I realize that many people don't have that journey. But it just fortifies the importance of finding your métier, if I can put it that way, your interest in an area, and then hopefully it helps you in the rest of your life. Now, some people discover different interests after they leave university, and credit to them. They also make it a, their life's mission, and that's the way it should be, I think. So it helped me because I was in an area that was new, exciting. And you know what? As we can see also from your recent writings, it's still an exciting area. Every time I read an article that you publish, I remind myself of what academic intellectual property is and should be, and it's something we all have to aspire to. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you.
Mm.
So, in addition to your work in government, in addition to your work in practice and academia, you are also a grassroots leader. How long have you been a grassroots leader?
Okay, first, I really need to debunk the idea of being a grassroots leader. I wouldn't really consider myself a grassroots leader. I'm a lawyer that helps out with pro bono legal work in one of the branches in Singapore, one of the political branch offices. I do help with other aspects, sometimes non-legal. And that's the way I've been engaged. I've been doing this since 2004. I don't really make too much of, I don't really make it something at the forefront of what people know of me, but it's something I've been doing pretty consistently. And it's helpful because I think when you have legal clinics with residents in the community, it really brings you down to earth, and you really understand what really are the problems that trouble them, which you then have to help them solve. So I think it's very helpful to me as well, and hopefully one's answers are appreciated by residents. But I won't consider myself really a grassroots leader as such. But I apply my skills to where I think they fit best in the branch.
So let's talk about time management. How do you manage it?
I don't. I think that's the answer to it. It's a perennial challenge. It's a perennial challenge. I generally have to manage all facets within a calendar, and of course we need to know what the priorities are. So the priorities are, I mean, the judges, the arbitrators, they set our lives. So the first thing is to recognize that and put that down first as the hard stop. You can't tell a judge that you can't appear in court because you have to attend a community event or IPOS meeting. That will not wash at all. You just have to prioritize that over everything else, and then everything else builds from there. In my earlier years, this could be a potential mess with diary clashes and everything else. But what I try and do now is to have an overview where I take some time to plan a month, and I also plan a week every week. So at the start of the week, I would really know what I'm going to be doing, and at the start of the month, I also know what I'll be doing. And I think you just have to discipline yourself to consciously understand that. So as a result of that, I'm probably missing fewer appointments. It comes at, my secretary is obviously the person that least appreciates this endeavor, but she's been with me since 1999. So it is a long partnership and friendship. So she's helped me a lot.
Thanks. I want to read something to you. It goes like this. He walked with us, he walked ahead of us, shattered and confused. Our conversations were so diffused. Yet he was there with us, though we knew him not, a gentle whisper with erudition to soothe us in search of the succor that eludes. Does it sound familiar?
Why are you quoting that to me?
Well, that leads us to my next question. So you wrote this poem, and my question in that regard is, what inspired you to write it?
Won't consider myself a poet by any means, but sometimes you do get some inspiration, and you appreciate, those who have gone before, and what they do, what it means, what mentorship means, what personal leadership means, and actually translates itself in terms of very practical context. So I would, yeah, it's a total inspiration. That's a role model for sure.
So this leads me to ask you about the role of faith in leadership. And you have been active in the Anglican diocese. In 2022, you were appointed chancellor. Let's start with how your faith has informed your leadership.
Been a Christian for many years. I mean, I was baptized from birth, but I had to come to my own realization and confirmation in my teens. And that's really been a pretty important part of my life. It's still, it is actually at the very center of things. Not just in terms of knowledge of the Bible, but also the application. Because if you think about it, the values of real leadership actually do align very well with servant leadership as we understand it. And so it's been, I mean, I would say it's at the core of how I live my life. Very important to me. Not just in the church context, but also outside it. And also, you'd be surprised, in the area of dispute resolution and dispute management, you do confront similar challenges, even in a church context, and you do need to apply a lot of wisdom and discernment to resolve these problems. Church is no different as an organization from any other agency in the world.
So the office, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so you're applying the same principles in any event, and it's probably better to do that. You need to really find an alignment on how you lead your life, and then you will see it translating to all aspects of it consistently.
So the office that you now hold as chancellor, your late father, Justice Lai Kew Chai, also held for many years. He was appointed to the High Court at age 40. He was the youngest judge to be appointed to the High Court. He was also the longest serving member of the Supreme Court bench. He served for almost 25 years. Can you reflect on your relationship with him and what he taught you about leadership?
Well, I mean, first of all, actually today is the 7th of February. It happens to be his birthday, which is timely. So I always, remember his life, and by today he would have been 84. He was still alive. Born in 1941. It's been a for him, I do miss him greatly every day. I still very much do. Every time there is a difficult problem that arises, on more than one occasion, I've always reflected, well, if he was still around, I could have actually a conversation with him after dinner and get to a solution, which actually guided me a lot in my earlier years as a lawyer. And it's both ways. I mean, he would also share his challenges in his work and vice versa. So I do miss that very much, and it's a relationship which I very much hope I can foster with my own children. Although I think he still would be a better father than I am, but I think
why do you say that?
Because I think he managed his time so much better than myself. I find that with a lot of my work and everything I have to do outside it as well, sometimes my family gets neglected. It's one of my regrets. I'm trying to make good, and I try to set aside time, but it's an ongoing endeavor. But somehow he was always there when I needed him. So I want to make sure that I'm also there for my kids all the time if possible. But alas, there are also responsibilities. But it's also the quality of the conversations, which I think was helpful. I didn't really appreciate his role as chancellor of the diocese as much, because I always proceeded on the basis that, look, he gave advice and everybody listened to what he had to say, and that did not seem to be that much of a problem. But then I took on the role myself, and I realized, well, actually, you have to do quite a lot to socialize solutions and explain, which perhaps I did not quite appreciate when he had the job. Of course, the church has also changed. We also have, in a regional level, Singapore's under the province of Southeast Asia that just celebrated its 29th anniversary last Sunday. Next year will be the 30th anniversary. But also the larger Anglican communion is very fractured at the moment, principally with developments going on in the Church of England in the UK. So these are new challenges which perhaps he didn't have to encounter, but we as a church and as a province, we've got to formulate a response, and we have in response to these global changes. So it's a different time, different season, different challenges.
And is this appointment for a fixed term?
You serve at the pleasure of the Bishop of Singapore. So your first and foremost role is you're his legal advisor. So I'm a legal advisor to Bishop Titus Cho in Singapore, and so he appoints me to the role, and I serve at his pleasure.
So one of the things that you do outside of work is music, and I know that's a big part of your life. When I spoke to Mr. Darren Tang, we briefly talked about the role of music and leadership. Do you see a role in your music where you draw lessons about leadership from?
Well, I'm not I mean Darren is a great jazz pianist, and I think there was one IPOS dinner and dance where the chairman and the chief executive actually did a performance together, which I thought could have gone worse. That was quite nice. It was a jazz piece. But I must say that my own path in music is very uncheckered and unconventional. I don't read notes. So I play completely by ear, which makes it useful if you have to do impromptu work. Other musicians who are note bound don't tend to appreciate when you extemporize and adapt and play perhaps in a less guarded fashion, if I can put it as gingerly as I can. But it's a very different style. I mean, it's something which I think is similar to how I approach problems on a dynamic basis sometimes. If I have to explain certain things, helpful to be able to, you need a good ear in most things, not just to listen, but to adapt to conversations around you as they evolve. And sometimes they can change very quickly. And you can't just keep following the score sheet and playing on regardless of what those around you are doing. So I think that in itself is a useful skill set of adaptability and quick reaction. As to whether I have enough time with it, I don't. I very much would like time with it. Maybe after I retire, because I think there's a lot going on in music, especially the interaction between music and artificial intelligence. And I think it will come to a stage where we can actually hear collections that are self-created. You're seeing more musicians that are contributing entire collections to AI developers, and you're just going to have a corpus of new work. I mean, for example, the Beatles, after the remaining Beatles leave us, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there's another Beatles 3.0 or 4.0 that may be released in the same genre, same style, and you wonder where John, Paul, Ringo, and George went. They're still there, still amongst us. So I think it's interesting to be in this time where you're following and musically you can understand what's going on, which I think is important. Yeah, so exciting times, but I look forward to spending more time with it. Don't spend enough time with it, but sometimes it is a great stress reliever.
So you mentioned retirement. Are you thinking about retirement specifically? And what does that actually look like, given the many hats you wear?
Um, I think, different seasons of time, you just have to change and turn and move with the seasons of time as they change. Nothing would last forever. And when you drop certain responsibilities, you may pick up new ones. And when you're in your 50s and you're thinking about 60s, and the question is, when you're 65, you got to think about moving on and doing other things. And that's always in my mind. Pictures forming, but I think there'll be time to pursue other interests as well. So the idea is to stay, healthy, learn as much as you can, and hopefully sustain yourself into the later years.
So in connection with that, let's talk about legacies. You may or may not have thought about it, but to the extent you have, at A&G as head of the department, at IPOS as chairman, as well as at the diocese as chancellor, what would you want to leave behind? What might you want to institutionalize as your legacy, having held the office in each of those organizations?
Not sure if legacy is the right word. Because you see, if you believe in servant leadership in its truest sense, you're not it's stewardship. So you're a steward of a role for a given time, and after you finish that, you hopefully put in place a system where your successor would actually flourish, and that in itself is a great achievement. I don't believe in having being immortalized or having a legacy. It has those notes which I don't really like. I just like to be remembered for, not made a contribution, not having completely botched up the whole thing, and actually move on to another thing and enjoying it. So I think that's an important perspective, I think. I mean, that you see, you can't standardize the extent of what it is with each role, because each role is so different. So in terms of practice, for example, I mean the one thing I find myself trying to do now is really to empower and to equip younger lawyers to chase their dreams. And I find that more and more metrics are really important. You really need to make your financial targets and so on, but you also need to instill meaning. So it's not just metrics, it's meaning as well. They need to find meaning in what they do and be interested in expanding a skill set. So if you can do that, I think that's a helpful.
What's an example of helping a lawyer pursue their dreams beyond
I think experience, whether it's seeing whether they can find an attachment in a foreign set of chambers that can give them broader, breadth, encouraging them to pursue technical aspects of AI development, cybersecurity, the latest techniques of hacking, malware, and what are the latest. You just have to constantly encourage them to expand their skill set and become current, and become thought leaders, rather than just, I would like to think that we're trying to build architects, not really just builders that go through the motion, even though that's important and that needs to be done, but maintaining a larger lens over the whole landscape. I think that's very important going forward, especially when legal practice is changing so quickly. Yeah.
Do you see leadership renewal as something that is working? Let's talk about the legal fraternity in general.
Well, legal fraternity, I mean, leaders will emerge, whether by constitutional appointment or the vote of members. And each person has a contribution, and you just have to understand what that is, what the priorities are. Those of us who are not really in that role of leadership in the profession, but are managing teams and larger teams of lawyers, you get to see things from a different perspective. And sometimes it's important to feedback, the assets of what the truisms of mentorship and what that means now. And being available, having a listening ear. These are all things which we're doing a lot of things now, which maybe our predecessors and those who went before us may not actually have practiced in the profession at a certain time. But now, increasingly, I think you do need to be available. We've had to adapt and adjust to deal with that and make yourself accessible, because I think if a conversation is sometimes left too late or overnight, it won't happen ever. And if the lawyer in question is receptive, then it's better to seize the moment and deal with it.
So, last question is an open one for you to reflect as you wish, tie up any unfinished thoughts. What would you like to leave with our audience as a final point for consideration, reflection, inspiration?
I think we're in a very interesting phase of life where we're, on the one hand, seeing a burgeoning technology that is taking the whole of world development into the new age. I personally believe that technology should be at the forefront of every government's consideration and every private enterprise's consideration going forward, because it is going to change, and it is already changing the way we operate and work. And you've got to consider this all the different facets of life. So that in itself is an ongoing conversation that of course extends beyond the reach of our time together today, but it's something which I think we really need to harvest and harness amongst all stakeholders. So I'm really looking forward to more conversations. And the interesting thing also is when I go overseas, and like when I go to the US, you learn so much from those who are already at the heart of it, who actually have to interact with AI developers and platforms and creators. And there's never been a more challenging time where creators' interests and developers' interests and platforms' interests are all coming together. And sometimes it's also a question of political leadership, seeing the interface between law and ethics in the governance of content, and the approach taken by different countries is also fascinating to me. So I think the one thing I would just say is we just can't afford to stop learning, and when I think it's really a daily discipline to put into the quality of one's personal study is really important. To put down everything in terms of thoughts and notes and so on, and I think that's something I would leave with people. Yeah.
Actually, let me follow up on that. What does that look like for you personally? This journey of learning, putting things down in thoughts and notes.
So if I can just show you, I mean, this is one of my notebooks. There are many, and I just finished it recently, but you can see hundreds of pages of handwritten notes. This is really like my AI. Everything that I hold important in AI and principles that have emerged, it's all been handwritten. So I still do that, but it's a way of making sure I don't forget, and I can take it into the next article I'm writing or the next notebook, if you like. So I still have that kind of, that's something I had from university days, which I still apply, and it's important, I think.
Without a digital index, how do you find a thought on page 37 or
there are no, there are no
194.
yeah, there are no pages. I know I will know roughly where it is and I'll get to it. But that's important, I think. For me, that's still the best way I process. So what I'm basically saying is, even though we have so many new tools, we can have screen pens and we can even write notes on simulated electronic paper. You've got to stick to the best learning media of your choice that would suit you. It's not something that you can foist on others, but whatever helps you retain information the best. I think that's an important discipline. Because a lot of life now is more and more not just marshalling what your knowledge is, but also marshalling the right questions to prompt AI to come up with. So I just feel that we've got to be whisperers and prompters going forward. But in order to be that, you still need a corpus of core knowledge. If you don't have that, then it's going to be a very dangerous world.
Well, I asked for reflection, inspiration, and you gave all that and more. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Profiles in Leadership.